Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade and also an honorary captain of the Royal Canadian Navy, appointed by Canada's National Defence Minister. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the treaty territory of the Cowichan First Nations and the unceded territory of our Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, and Semiahmoo First Nations. I'd also like to acknowledge that we live and work on the lands of the Inuit and Métis peoples as well. Events like this simply do not happen at the Surrey Board of Trade without sponsorship support. Thank you so much to our presenting sponsor, the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, and our business and international trade center sponsors. They are the law firm of Fasken, the Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan, represented by SNF Benefits, BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada, and Scotiabank. If you're starting a business, need business support, or international documentations or global connections, visit the Surrey Board of Trade's Business and International Trade Center. We are now open for in-person service. I'd like to recognize some government officials that are with us this afternoon. They are Stephanie Cadu, MLA for Surrey, South Surrey. Representing Trevor Halford, MLA for Surrey White Rock, is Effie Cerise. His Worship, the Mayor of White Rock, Daryl Walker. City of Surrey Councillors, Linda Annis and Stephen Pettigrew. And City of Vancouver Councillor, Adrian Carr. Thank you so much for joining us. Just some instructions before we begin. All attendees are muted. If you do have a question, please put it in the chat function of the technology and we will get to your question during the question period. If we're unable to, of course, we'll send you the answer after the session is over. So start thinking about those questions and put them in the chat function now. I just wanted to start off by saying that Surrey is going to be the largest city in British Columbia by 2030, experts are indicating. We're still growing by 1,200 to 1,400 people a month, despite the pandemic. We have the greatest number of manufacturers within British Columbia. A third of our land base is agricultural. We have an international docking facility. A third of our population is under the age of 19. 50% of our population has a mother tongue other than English. The human capital assets are here, but Surrey is also open for business because we have the most industrial land inventory within Metro Vancouver. Surrey and the South Fraser Economic Region is where it's at for British Columbia's economy. And so a strong part of British Columbia's economy is the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. And to tell you a little bit more, please help me welcome the Manager for External Relations, Gateway Strategies, Jocelyn Young. Jocelyn, over to you.
Thank you, Anita. Always a wonderful welcome from you. And thank you to the Surrey Board of Trade for hosting today's event. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Tsawwassen, Semiahmoo, Katzie, and Kwantlen peoples on whose ancestral lands I'm speaking from today, and to extend my thanks to them. My name is Jocelyn Young. As Anita said, I'm the Manager of External Relations, Gateway Strategy at the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. I'm pleased to be here today to welcome BC's Green Party leader, Sonia Furstenau, in a conversation about BC's economic recovery. The Port of Vancouver is Canada's largest port, supporting 115,000 supply chain jobs across the country and connecting Canadian consumers and businesses to more than 170 countries around the world. As the federal agency responsible for the stewardship of the lands and waters that make up the Port of Vancouver, some of those lands being right here in Surrey, our role as the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority is to ensure goods are moved safely, efficiently, and sustainably. Environmental protection is part of our mandate as a Canada Port Authority, and our environmental programs are central to delivering on that mandate. What's more, we have a vision for the Port of Vancouver to be the world's most sustainable port, a lofty goal to be sure, but one that we're confident in achieving. To us, a sustainable port means a healthy environment, economic prosperity through trade, and thriving communities. The hard work and dedication of our partners in the supply chain have kept Canada's trade moving, supplying products to people and businesses across the country at a critical time, while also maintaining strong Canadian exports to markets around the world. This big picture has an impact on our daily lives. Last year, we saw trade through the Port of Vancouver grow overall by 1%, even during a pandemic. While some sectors such as cruise and automobiles had very challenging years, other sectors continued to grow. Containerized trade set a new record in 2020, providing consumer goods to businesses and people across the country, while also providing capacity for food, agriculture, forest products, and many other Canadian exports. It was also a record year for grain exports with a staggering 24% increase. Canada really is feeding the world. These demands and increases show that even in tough times and an economic downturn, demand for Canadian trade is growing. To help facilitate this trade, in partnership with industry and government, we're investing $1 billion in trade and transportation infrastructure across the Lower Mainland. As we look ahead to economic recovery from the pandemic, the port will continue to play a major role in supporting good-paying jobs for families and businesses in Surrey, the Lower Mainland, and across Canada. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker and leader for the BC Green Party, MLA Sonia Furstenau. Sonia was elected as the MLA for Cowichan Valley. Yes, please come on screen. Sonia was elected as the MLA for Cowichan Valley in 2017 and 2020. As House Leader for the BC Green Party, she currently sits on 6 parliamentary committees, including the Select Standing Committee on Children and Youth and the Legislative Assembly Management Committee. Prior to her election to the legislature, Sonia served as Area B Director for the Cowichan Valley Regional District for 3 years. Sonia has worked as a teacher in the Victoria School District and in Shawnigan, and earned her BA and an MA in History from the University of Victoria. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to MLA Sonia Furstenau. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn and Anita, for the introduction and for the invitation to be here today with the Surrey Board of Trade. I am joining you from Coast Salish lands, the territories of Cowichan tribes and Malahat Nation. And I also want to acknowledge the territories of Tsawwassen, Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo, on whose land Surrey is situated. I had the joy this morning to go spend time on the edge of the Cowichan River with the Cowichan Stewardship Society and listen to Tim Kolcheski, who's a Cowichan Tribes member and a biologist, talk about the creatures, the animals of this region, and how we are all connected. And it was a particular joy, as I think we're all experiencing now, to have these in-person opportunities and events, which we've been missing for so long. And I very much look forward to being in person sometime in the near future in Surrey as well. And a hello to my colleagues from the BC Legislature, Stephanie Cadieux and Trevor Halford, and to Adrian Carr as well. It's great to be here, and to the Mayor. Thank you for joining. We've all been through a lot this year. We've weathered a pandemic and the social and economic impacts that come with it. The impacts of the climate emergency are intensifying. The opioid crisis is ongoing. And when I look around, the unequal effects of these crises are plain to see. In Surrey, you've had the largest share of COVID-19 cases of any BC city. Visible minorities are twice as likely to have contracted COVID, compounding the realities that we are coming to recognize of systemic racism in our institutions and in our society. The economic crisis that came with COVID has been called a she-cession for its disproportionate impact on women. And as some of the survivors of Lytton have recounted, they were the perfect example of whom climate change hurts the most, a low-income, largely Indigenous community. The last 6 weeks have also laid bare the myths of Canadian history that now must be left behind as we collectively come to terms with the violence and destruction of colonialism as uncovered in the unmarked graves of so many hundreds of Indigenous children. To move forward, we need honesty and clarity. Honesty about our past and the significant challenges we face in the present, and clarity about what we should be striving for in our future, and ultimately, what we owe to future generations. Over the course of the last year and a half, the discourse has focused often on building back better from the pandemic. But the concern that I have is we are not going to learn enough from the hard lessons we've been taught. And rather than building back better, we risk sliding back to status quo. In truth, we are rebuilding in a changed world, and we have to change with it. The economic disruptions caused by COVID-19 have been massive. 645,000 British Columbians lost their job or the majority of their work hours during the height of the first wave. It's a quarter of the provincial workforce. And of all the jobs lost, 82% of them were in the Lower Mainland. I'm sure that many of you have friends and families who were impacted by these job losses. My son works in the conference industry and lost his full-time job last April. He's found freelance and contract work, but has yet to return to a full-time position. The results of job losses are more than economic. They impact a household's housing security, their physical and mental health, and more. That's why the claims that our economy is bouncing back don't tell the whole story. The human toll of the last year and a half has not been equitable. A recent report examined the economic downturn more closely. The researchers found that not only were women more likely to have lost their jobs during COVID, they were more likely to be lower income women, more likely to be Indigenous or racialized, and more likely to be disabled. Young people in particular have borne the brunt of the economic shutdown. 42% of young women lost their jobs in the first wave, and 31% of young men. I think it is important to pause and reflect on why these groups were more vulnerable to the economic downturn. The majority of frontline pandemic workers, such as caregivers and service industry workers, are women. Their jobs are essential services that cannot be done from home, and these roles are disproportionately filled by racialized women. As a result, these individuals are more likely to be laid off since they can't work remotely, or they were forced to remain working in settings that place them at a higher risk of infection. Which is what brings me to rebuilding our economy. If our province is a house, it had a cracked foundation. That's why the storm brought it down. To rebuild, we need to look at the blueprints again. We need to build something stronger and more equitable, something resilient, so that when the next storm comes, we'll be okay. Not just some of us, not just those who could work remotely or had more resources, but all of us together. Your community at the Surrey Board of Trade has recognized this. You have taken action on paid sick leave, for example. The province is currently creating a permanent paid sick leave for British Columbians, a program that will outlast the pandemic. Paid sick leave is good public policy. When jurisdictions introduced temporary paid sick leaves during the pandemic, their COVID infection numbers went down, and fewer people lost wages and hours, and employers saved on costs. Paid sick leave is a win-win situation, but it can be better. You recognize this when you asked the province to consider paid sick leave for temporary foreign workers, for example, and highlighted the importance of expanding access to paid sick leave to the entire workforce. You saw the possibility to build something better, and you embraced it. Those possibilities, those solutions are all around us. Our communities are brimming with creativity, with care and resilience. It's everywhere you look. In many cases, the solutions work together. Right now, the City of Surrey is gathering community perspectives to help develop an urban forest management strategy. This is something that can help preserve not only our local ecosystems, but prevent the heat island effect that made our city so much hotter than rural areas during the heat waves. Saving trees can literally save lives by helping high density urban areas stay cool. Alongside these community initiatives, businesses are reopening in a world that looks different. Business owners are rethinking their practices, and workers are considering their rights and responsibilities. Public space has expanded as restaurants open patios and communities push for pedestrian streets complete with art and music, something that I think we've all come to enjoy in our communities. It's a solution to the dangers of indoor gatherings throughout COVID, bringing in business safely while bringing people together. And every time a worker puts on a mask before shift, they're not only thinking about themselves, but about the people around them. This community-focused behavior is a solution and a cause for hope. Like an individual considering the needs of the people around them, leaders have a responsibility to consider and anticipate the needs of the community. Take small businesses, for example. The pandemic has exacerbated the challenges that they face. The bookshop down the street is trying to keep the lights on, but their global competitor is making billions. The cards are stacked against them, and as leaders, we have a responsibility to help. That's why we've advocated for a rent subsidy program for small businesses and for grant money for small tourism operators. These are solutions that work, not just to help small businesses make it through this tough time, but to build a thriving, resilient local economy. There might be more shutdowns in our future. There will definitely be more challenges. Why not take this opportunity, this moment, to set up these programs now so that we're ready in a place for the next time that we need them? Leadership isn't just about reacting to a crisis, it's anticipating the next one and preparing for it. Before the onset of the pandemic last year, I read an op-ed that argued that good business requires good government too. The writer, Catherine Holt, was then the head of the Victoria Chamber of Commerce. And she pointed out that when governments keep society healthy, it's good for business. I often think back to her piece when looking at the government's push to restart the economy. Our political leaders are the people we have elected to look at the blueprints as we build a better foundation. Our solutions, paid sick leave, forest management, addressing systemic racism in government institutions, are the pieces we need to patch these cracks. All we need now is for our leaders to be bold enough to make these solutions happen. It's good for business, it's good for people, and it will help us be more resilient when we face whatever tomorrow brings. We know there will be more challenges to come. Epidemiologists are warning of the COVID variants taking hold. The science tells us that extreme weather events will continue and will worsen. Reinvigorating our economy after a year and a half of uncertainty is no easy feat. But recognizing the uncertainty that lies ahead of us is essential. Even with all of this, I am hopeful. I'm hopeful because all around us there are solutions, large and small. There are advocates and experts with great ideas. There are communities that are passionate about helping one another. There are kids who see more clearly than many adults, like the 4-year-old girl in Cloverdale who collected food bank donations in lieu of presents for her birthday party last week. People recognize the need to help one another. People recognize the need for change. And as I heard from Cowichan Tribe's member and biologist Tim Kolcheski this morning, people recognize that we are connected to each other and we are connected to the natural world. This brings me back to building back better in a changed world. Things look different, and now we have the opportunity to choose. Either we can build back as we once did and continue to be reactive to crises, even though we know this will harm the most vulnerable and marginalized people first, or we can acknowledge the reality and prioritize equity and resilience. To do so, we have to go beyond embracing creative solutions. We have to work together and hold our leaders to account in the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sonia, and thank you so much for spending this time virtually in Surrey, British Columbia. Just some questions I wanted to pose to you, and my first is really related to what is your perspective on British Columbia's Clean BC strategy? Is it really the right pathway towards addressing current and future climate change issues?
Thanks, Anita. I think it's such a important question, especially for the moment that we're in right now, as we see the impacts from the climate emergency worsening, particularly in the interior. Every newscast that we hear right now is about an increase in the number of fires and evacuations. I think Clean BC absolutely addresses a part of the solution we need to be making. We need to be looking at how do we get emissions reduced in our industrial sector. We need to be looking at how to electrify the economy. The piece that we also have to recognize in addressing and responding to climate change is the human factor. What do our communities look and feel like if we really embrace creating climate resiliency and equity as a part of our response to climate change? And how do we build these more equitable and more connected communities? And I think what we're seeing, and I just heard this on a newscast on the way back from Cowichan River, which is that communities in the interior are feeling more prepared now for these wildfires because they learned the lessons from 2017 and 2018, and they are being more proactive in response to these wildfires. We can look at somewhere like France, where after the terrible heat waves that cost the lives of tens of thousands of people, the French government implemented an approach to responding to heat waves and weather events by having a deeply connected infrastructure within their communities where everybody knew where the most vulnerable people were, where the elderly were, and what was the plan to get them to a safe cooling center or a safe place. And I think that this is the next step we need to take as a province, is really understanding that we can have a top-down sort of industry government driven response to climate change. And we need that. We need to get the emissions down. We need to be building that resilience, but we also need the bottom up. And that's the connected communities where we are building that social resilience and cohesion as well as a response to climate change.
What is your perspective on infrastructure investments? And, recently, of course, the SkyTrain announcement by the Prime Minister took place in Surrey. And certainly the cost has doubled. It's close to 4 billion, and we really don't know what the actual price is going to be, and doesn't really connect all of Surrey.
Mhm.
What's your perspective on infrastructure investments and it being the right pathway towards job creation, but also reduction of greenhouse gas emissions? And if you can address electric vehicles in that too, that would be
Mhm.
great.
Thanks, Anita. And I think one of the things that we have to consistently and constantly be asking ourselves, and particularly the people that are making decisions in government, is where are we trying to get to? What is the outcome we're trying to achieve? So we want communities that are connected, that have access to this kind of infrastructure that can move people around, transport them, and reduce our emissions. We absolutely need to be striving for that. But in making those decisions, we need to make sure that we are responding to the community's needs, the community's understanding of what is needed the very most. And sometimes what can happen is decisions are made either in Ottawa or in Victoria, and the community where impacted by that decision, usually positively, can sometimes say, well, how come you didn't consider these factors that we've put on the table? It doesn't connect all of Surrey. This wasn't what was, you know, identified as the need. And so that is the part about working together. And I think that there has to be a recognition of the wisdom, the capacity, and the understanding that local communities have. And that has to be such a significant part of the decision making that happens at other levels of government. And I think that that's going to be a relentless struggle and attention. But if we are agreeing on the shared outcomes we want to achieve, connected, vibrant, healthy, safe, resilient communities that address the challenges of inequality and climate change, then we measure the success of our capital infrastructure investments by whether they are moving us towards those outcomes as quickly as we need them to be doing that.
Sonia, you had articulated earlier that every person matters. We can't leave anyone behind.
Mhm.
And certainly one of the pieces, and actually no business organization has done this well. We're looking at it here in Surrey at the Board of Trade, this concept of the longevity economy to ensure that those that are exiting the workforce officially, still are productive members of our economy.
Mhm.
And so those are our seniors, but they also need access to technology. They are victims of cybercrime. What is your party's perspective on supporting seniors and the supports that they need within our current and future economy?
Mhm. Yeah, it's so important to be thinking about this, and particularly looking at our kind of demographic trends. And I'll just take Cowichan for example. Our demographic projection is that our population is going to be steadily aging for the next several decades, and our average age is going to continue to get higher. And so this comes back to, okay, how do we be proactive? We don't just wait until, oh my gosh, we have, a great abundance of elders in our community, but we haven't put in place the services, the community structure that will ensure that that wisdom, that knowledge, and that experience that they have and can share with the community are also part of what they can be contributing. And so it comes down again in a lot of ways to infrastructure. So one of the things lacking here, and this has been a consistent issue we've had, are where are the community centers for seniors? Where are the embedded services so that there's a connectivity for seniors who are living at home, but can access the supports that they need in the community, whether that's grocery delivery or home health care services. And so it is about the valuing, and I think you're right to say that we have to value every single person, and valuing people at all stages of their lives and where they're at, and recognizing that having that infrastructure, it benefits all of us. It benefits everybody in the community if the seniors are integral and integrated into our community lives, because they have so much to offer. And I see that right here in my neighborhood. Just the connection between our kids going next door and mowing the lawns, or checking in on the seniors during the heat waves. We need to build that integration right into our neighborhoods. We need to know our neighbors, care for our neighbors, and understand who they are, and we're all going to benefit and be richer for that.
Sonia, do you believe, or what's your perspective on a comprehensive reform of British Columbia's tax code and all of the taxes that are eroding businesses' bottom line?
Mhm. I certainly hear a great deal from small businesses in my riding and widely around British Columbia about the burden that they feel with the growing kind of costs of just being in business. And as we know with small businesses, and I was a bookkeeper for many years for small businesses, so I had a small business myself, and I know in those books the last person to be paid is the owner of the business, that all of the other expenses, the salaries, the rent, the taxes all come first. And so I have, some understanding of that extraordinary burden that is on small businesses. And it comes back again to this question of what do we want to achieve? Where do we want to get to? And we know that when we're in the center of our communities where small businesses are thriving, that's where we want to spend our time and our money. with these small independent businesses that add that flavor and culture. And we know the owners, they hire our kids, they contribute enormously to our local community and our local economy and our local cultures. And so what we need to be doing when we look at the overall tax kind of framework in this province is saying, okay, if we all agree that what we want are these thriving local economies and businesses, but that we have to recognize, provinces need to generate revenue in order to continue to provide the services, as I said in the speech, that make business environments healthy. How do we get to that place? And I think that one of the questions that came up before the 2020 election that was a part of the conversation before we were in the second and third wave of COVID was around wealth taxes. And we've seen over the course of this pandemic, yet another fairly significant transfer of wealth into hands of already, the billionaire realm. And I think that it's time for a conversation around wealth tax, around, recognizing that we are getting that concentration of wealth happening. And it is not being concentrated in the hands of small business owners, that's for certain. When we look at the profits that Amazon made over the course of this pandemic, and you consider the workers that were working for Amazon, many of whom experienced exposures to the pandemic, to the virus, we have to ask ourselves, as a society, what is the equation that we can accept between the value of the work and the labor and the profit and the wealth that's generated? And I think that it's time for us to have this conversation, but I'm very aware of how challenging it is for small businesses and medium-sized businesses in our province, and that the pandemic has put many of them either to a place where they can't afford to continue or where they are right on the edge, having taken a lot of debt on. And we have to be mindful of how do we ensure that we don't lose this absolutely essential sector of our economy.
The urgency is quite significant from our perspective when it comes to tax reform, not only by the province, but also local and federal governments, because there are significant bottom line pressures, not only tax related, but rising cost pressures that are really, saying, entrepreneurs are saying, why should I be in business anymore? And that is not what type of environment we want to have. We need a better environment for business.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to get your perspective on, the construction and development sector. It's been just so great for Surrey. We've had that thriving sector that's been able to survive, be alive during the pandemic. But one of the challenges, and this could be related to housing supply,
Mm-hmm.
industrial lands creating jobs, is those lands that have water-bearing features. And so development approvals, they go to city council. There's green infrastructure network permits and approvals that need to be had not only by the city, but also by the province of BC. And things are not being done quickly enough by the province. We've spoken, of course, to the province about this topic, but how can we remove red tape for these developers, for those in the construction sector, to really enable more housing supply, more job creation in terms of building more businesses?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's again, I'm going to keep coming back to this because I think it's one of the things that we lack in our kind of political discourse around things is we're very focused on the here and now, but we have to always be asking ourselves, okay, where do we want to be in 10 years, in 25 years, in 50 years? And we have official community plans that really help guide that. But often, and I was at local government, those plans could be amended and changed and let go of. And so people who feel like they've invested in a future for their community can have growing cynicism around how decisions are made. And yes, the interaction between province and municipalities or province and regional districts can be very challenging and very troubling. In some cases, it can be the opposite of what you're experiencing, which is the province is greenlighting activities in regional districts that the community doesn't feel like they were consulted or agree with, or as you're describing, the community has made a decision and wants to proceed, and they get into challenges with the province around, as you pointed, red tape or the processes that are there. When it comes to, for example, as you said, water bearing or lands that have a particular environmental service that they might be providing, we do have to be mindful of this. We do have to recognize that those services are also a part of the future success of our communities. And so having the understanding of what those services are providing and why they are essential is a big part of the decision making. You also need to have clarity from the province on how, what are the parameters for the decision making on that. And I think that that's got to be explicit and clear. I come back to, and it's more of a semi-rural issue than it is with the more urban municipalities, but we do have to think about our carrying capacities in our watersheds, particularly in semi-rural areas like Cowichan, where we've seen extreme droughts happen and been close to households being cut off from water. So I think there is that complicated intersection between land use and the need to, of course, build more housing and keep things going. But we do have to be mindful of those very essential services that our land provides, so that we are not forsaking the well-being of the future by building in areas that really need to be providing those services. So it is a balance, and we have to strive for that.
What's your perspective on the public safety transition that is taking place in Surrey right
Mm.
now?
Well, I will say I'm watching it peripherally, and what I am concerned about in what I see is that there seems to be quite a lot of division, and that there isn't a real sense of consensus about the path forward on this. And I think it's important that the community really does feel represented in very significant decisions like that when they're being made. And I'm not uh, going to weigh in on the details of this, but I think it is always a lesson for those of us in local government, and this was a lesson for me at the early part of my tenure in local government, which is that a big part of my job was to listen to and respond to the community's perspective on decisions, whether they were future or decisions that had already been made, and to recognize that people feel deeply invested at their local community level in these outcomes. And if you know there needs to be that back and forth between decision makers and the community to ensure that people are moving forward as together as we can be.
Sonia, during the pandemic and even before the pandemic, there were significant skill shortages across
Mhm.
industries. We're certainly seeing that in the hardest hit industries during the pandemic. But this is going to continue, especially with more jobs opening, uh, some segments of the population exiting the workforce. What is your perspective
Mhm.
on the path forward for addressing labor shortages that ultimately benefit or impact the bottom line?
Yeah. Oh, Anita, this is such an important question and issue, because this is a reality in so many communities right now. We are really seeing this lack of a skilled workforce, and so the absolute essential step to be taking is investing in the education, the training programs, the colleges, the post-secondary institutions that can ensure that we are a highly educated, highly trained province and society. This is the key to our well-being collectively. And I come from a long line of teachers on both sides of my family, and at university, college, high school, elementary, we cover the whole gamut. And for us, and I think that this is so essential, education and access to education, affordable education, recognizing the benefit of programs like we have here at Cowichan High School, where you can start your trades training right in high school and transition directly to Vancouver Island University and complete it there. We need to be looking at how do we very rapidly scale up that capacity to have the training and education in communities, so people don't have to leave their communities. They get their training, that education, and this is an investment in people. It's an investment in the future, and it's an investment in ensuring that we have the most resilient society we can.
When it comes to the pandemic, what is your perspective on preparing for future pandemics
Mhm,
and, future crises, whether it's an earthquake, for example, here in the Lower Mainland?
mhm. Boy, I think that, and as I said earlier, we've learned some hard lessons from COVID-19, and I think that the challenge on us now, and this is particularly for those of us who are elected, who are representatives, decision makers, is as much as we want to put this behind us and say, okay, let's move forward, let's go have some good times. It's all, as you point out, this will not be our last challenge. It likely won't be our last pandemic. And when you look at what epidemiologists are pointing out, these types of occurrences are happening with more frequency, and they are not disconnected from climate change, in that the changing global conditions are actually beneficial to pathogens. We're seeing, for example, malaria moving more northward than it ever has before. So the work now is to look with a very cold, very hard eyes at what didn't work, where we failed. And I think that COVID, and I'm going to come back to this over and over again, identified so clearly where the systemic inequalities exist in our society. The people who suffered the most were those who had the least capacity and resources and finances to buffer themselves. People in multi-generational households, people who had work that they couldn't stay home from, people who were working on lines like in meat packing plants, people without sick paid leave, or paid sick leave. So we've made some steps to recognize and acknowledge this, but we have a long ways to go. And importantly, we have to look at public health and our public health system as a means for reducing inequality, not just recognizing it and measuring it, but we have to reduce it. So, what are the ways that we can ensure that every citizen, every part of our population in BC has equitable access to healthcare, has equitable access to healthy food, that we know that our children are getting equitable access to high quality education. I mean, there's a lot to think about here, but the tragedy, from my point of view, will be if we do not lean into these really, really tough lessons that we've learned from COVID and recognize that as a society and as governments, we have to level that playing field more than it is now.
Well, another tough lesson that we've learned during the pandemic is around food systems and
Mhm.
supply chains. And as I mentioned at the top of the meeting, a third of Surrey's land base is composed of agricultural lands. But how can we, especially in urban environments like Surrey, from your perspective, really enhance the the creation of food
Mhm.
systems, not only on existing ag lands, but also maybe through vertical farming methodologies?
Yeah, there's extraordinary innovation happening, right? I mean, if we look at how do we create a built environment that creates healthy communities and healthy societies, this is an example where any building that's going in is not only going, we have to be serious about the emissions uh, factor on this, but also the food security factor and the heating and cooling security factor now more and more. So when you have buildings that have on top of the buildings, they're collecting the heat in the summer, and you have greenhouse capacity to be growing food that can then be uh, eaten right in the community, right in that neighborhood. We have to start getting very creative and very innovative about bolstering that food security. And connected to that, of course, is water security. And we just had the report out yesterday on watersheds. And not only, we think about water security, I want to turn on my tap and have clean water. Water security is connected to economic security. We cannot have a healthy, resilient economy without water security. We can't have food security without it. So we have to be, again, really focusing on the connectedness of these systems and how these systems interact with the health and well-being of our neighborhoods, our communities, our towns, and recognizing, the best time to act on this was maybe 20 or 30 years ago. The second best time is right now. We need to be very mindful about how we are going to increase security generally in our neighborhoods and communities.
Sonia, the Surrey Board of Trade, we're really the only business organization as part of Metro Vancouver's National Zero Waste
Mhm.
Council. And what's your perspective on creating more opportunities as it relates to the circular economy?
Mhm. Yeah, and this is one of the things that I think we forget to recognize is that the business community has often shown extraordinary leadership on recognizing that we do need to transform aspects of our economy. We do need to look ahead. And circular economy is something that I'm so delighted to see is gaining more and more traction. In fact, my two stepchildren this summer have co-op jobs with with Environment Canada, and they're both working on preparing the circular economy conference that's happening in September. So I'm always keen to hear who they're bringing in and what topics they're looking at. But this is something that, again, you know, we owe to young people right now to be recognizing that uh, we know that our consumption levels and that our level of waste is not sustainable. We are not going to be able to do this and expect to have a healthy, livable planet in coming decades and generations. And so, looking at zero waste, looking at circular economies, and recognizing that uh, the there are, I think we've come to a point where we see that increasing consumption is not necessarily the thing that is going to make us happier or healthier or even make us have a thriving economy, but reorienting ourselves to see consumption as a part of what we do. We all need to eat and drink and wear clothing and live in houses, but that there are other aspects of our society and social life and our economy that are not about increasing our consumption, but increasing our connection, increasing our relationships in our communities, increasing our communal experiences with everything from community centers to parks. One of the lines that I really like from George Monbiot is to consider the notion of um, personal sufficiency and public luxury, and that our libraries, our community centers, our schools, our pathways should really express that capacity that we have to invest in each other and invest in our own communities, and that there is an enormous benefit that we all get from creating that public luxury that we can have. And I think that, there's excitement to what we can envision as a way of living and being that benefits small businesses, medium businesses, people, nature, and we're at a time right now where we are compelled to think of these innovations and to think of these solutions, but that we can do them with a vision of how do we make this better for everybody? How do we actually improve our collective well-being by making these decisions?
My last question to you is there is a strategic investment fund that was recently announced by the BC government called the Nbc Fund, which is meant to be a transformational fund to commercialize technology products, create jobs.
Mhm.
What's your perspective on the future success of that?
Mm. I think the intention is excellent. I think that looking at triple bottom line, looking at investing in innovation, investing in technology here, recognizing that we want to be the thought leaders, the creators, the inventors, the technology kind of innovators, that we have the capacity to be here in BC, but that takes investment. We have underinvested in that very much in our province. My one caveat is around the transparency, and I think that there's a kind of a need right now for governments of all stripes at all levels to recognize that building and maintaining and growing trust of the public is an essential part of the work that we all have to do. And one way to achieve that, one of the measures that is so important, is that transparency. If we are using public funds and we are open and honest about the outcomes that we want to achieve from that, then the way to get the public to feel happy and excited and supportive of these kinds of measures is to be open and honest and transparent about are we achieving that with these public funds. And so that's the one piece that I hope we will see some shift on. I think it's really important to have that transparency with particularly this kind of money. It's a lot of money. And then we can celebrate together the successes that these kinds of funds and these kinds of investment funds can help create in our communities. So I'm hopeful with that one caveat.
Sonia, just my final message to you is that private sector partnerships are so essential for a technology-focused future to ensure our workforces of today and tomorrow are tying industry needs to curriculum development, for example, or infrastructure investments. Business matters. Surrey matters, given that we are going to be the largest city in British Columbia very soon. And I certainly thank you so much on behalf of the Surrey Board of Trade for being with us this afternoon. Any closing remarks?
Well, thank you, Anita. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm so grateful for the invitation and for the opportunity for a conversation with you. It is an exciting time for all of us, with those also a challenging time. But I have enormous hope and optimism and faith in people to come together and to recognize that we all do better together. Business matters because business recognizes that people are really at the center of all of these equations. And I thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you also to our presenting sponsor, the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. Ladies and gentlemen, we are hosting BC's Minister of Agriculture tomorrow at 10 a.m. Please be with us. Check out all of our upcoming programs and services at businessinsurrey.com. Make it a great business day